I'm Dr. Fiona Lovely, and this is the Not Your Mother's Menopause podcast. I'm taking the taboos of menopause and perimenopause and bringing light to the dark. No bullshit, no shame. It's time for us to gain a new paradigm in female health, out with the old and in with the new, and I'm bringing fresh perspectives from someone in the arena. I've been practicing women's health for nearly 20 years, and I'm spilling the tea on what it means to live at midlife, knowing that the best is yet to come. I'm sharing my Gen X approach to living through this transition. Sassy, a bit sweary, and always honest. Tactical tips and instantly usable information is my aim. I hope to make you laugh and that you learn something new that helps you embrace the change. Together, we bring power to the peri. Onward to the podcast. Hello, listeners. I'm Dr. Fiona Lovely, and this is the Not Your Mother's Menopause podcast. And Happy New Year to you. I hope you and your loved ones have had a lovely holiday season and that you feel rested and ready to emerge in a whole new year. Because, man, it's been a tough few years, and I'm just happy to put that all behind. Today, I have a great guest for you, and she and I have come to know each other. She took one of my courses last year, and we talk about that a bit in the show. And she is also a menopause doula, and we also discussed that in length, too. But let me introduce you to my guest, Mary Lee, menopause doula. We're going to have a conversation today about PTSD and menopause, and especially PTSD among women in service or uniformed women. And this is really an area that we've never explored on the show, number one. And number two is it really hasn't had the attention that it deserves. And what I'll say for sure is that a lot of us in perimenopause and menopause are dealing with symptoms that we wonder if they're not related to post-traumatic stress disorder. And if you're wondering, chances are they might be. And here's what's fascinating. You don't have to have been a veteran or had to have been in active duty to experience PTSD. Although in the veteran population, PTSD is far better studied than for those of us who have not seen active duty. So really an interesting, broad-ranging conversation. Let me introduce Mary properly. Mary is a retired veteran of the Canadian Armed Forces, serving more than 24 years. Since retiring from service, Mary worked as a PR practitioner in numerous industries, including healthcare, education, and life sciences. She has an insatiable appetite for knowledge, especially in health and wellness. In fact, Mary has pursued fitness and wellness as a side hustle for close to 30 years. In this field, she's been in contact with many women experiencing the same issue, perimenopause. The story is always the same. Complaints about weight gain, sleeplessness, brain fog, hot flashes, mood swings, and issues with digestion. It came to her that this is an area that is sadly lacking information and support, and that more resources are needed to empower women in their journey. Motivated by her own negative encounter with the misogynistic views and lack of knowledge and empathy for women's issues, Mary's made it her mission to debunk the misunderstanding and mistruths about women's health. Amen to that. Mary hosts the Menopause Disruptor podcast that features guest experts in the field of menopause and women's health, from the physical and mental to the emotional and spiritual. You can find Mary at mlcoaching.com and on Instagram at m_l_coaching. And those will be linked in the show notes below. So earlier in 2024, I happened to get an email with Mary's blog article called Menopause and PTSD Among Women in Service. And she talks about the symptoms, the common experience, and even the science behind what we know about women in menopause and having experienced PTSD. Now, here's something really interesting. We did a review of the literature, and it's coming out all the time. It's such interesting stuff. So fascinating. Female military personnel are twice as likely to experience early menopause. Isn't that so interesting? So, again, this is not just a conversation for women in the military or the families of women in the military, but anyone who's experienced what you think is symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. And hint, hint, for a lot of us, those symptoms are coming up at midlife as a reaction to our home environment when we were kids. For example, if we had an unstable parent, we learned how to read a room and act in a certain way because it stabilized us, kept us safe. Isn't that fascinating? So that tends to be that complex PTSD or CPTSD, which you may have heard of. It's a little bit different. But Mary and I talked about her journey in the military as a menopause doula, how she managed to become a menopause doula, and just it's such an interesting conversation. Mary is also a licensed menopause champion. Isn't that great? I hadn't heard that before. I thought that's great. God knows women in midlife, we need a champion, don't we? Most of us are doing it for ourselves, but man, if we can get support and help, that just makes all the difference. So we talk about a number of things in this conversation, and Mary gets vulnerable and shares her experience in the military, and it was brave. And I think it's going to help a lot of women to hear the story. For those of you who are listening to this conversation with Mary Lee and I, and wondering how you can become a menopause doula, a support specialist for women in the midlife transition, that is a program I am launching in early 2025, and I've been teaching this course for a few years now, and I'm really proud of it. I'm really excited about it, and it's actually just a really cool thing to be a menopause doula. So look for the link to sign up for information and updates in the show notes below, and I know how healing this conversation is going to be for you, my community, my listeners. So pass it on to whoever you think needs to hear it. But without further ado, here is my discussion with Mary Lee, menopause doula. Hello, anxiety, my old friend. Do you ever find yourself replaying the same thoughts over and over? Like a bad Spotify playlist you just can't skip. Or maybe you've been reaching for that nightly glass of wine to unwind and de-stress, but it causes you to wake up at 3 a.m. feeling regret for drinking it in the first place. I totally get it. Life is busy, your mind is racing, and stress is your unwelcome +1. Enter Trocom by Troscriptions. It's like a reset button for your brain, but better. These little troches dissolve in your mouth, helping to take the edge off, quiet the noise, and stop those incessant late-night thoughts, leaving you feeling calm and collected. And guess what? It's a guilt-free replacement for that wine. It'll help you relax without messing with your sleep. Whether you're juggling work, family, stress, or just trying to steal a few moments for yourself, let Trocom bring your chill back on demand. Visit Troscriptions.com and try it out today. Your mind and your sanity will thank you. Use code LOVELY10 for 10% off your order. Thanks, Troscriptions. As a doctor, I believe that one of the best aging breakthroughs of the last decade is qualia senolytic, and here's why. As we age, our bodies tend to accumulate senescent cells. Senescent cells are also known as zombie cells because they linger in your body long after their useful function, wasting your energy and nutrition, which can contribute to less energy, slower workout recovery, joint discomfort, and basically feeling old. Qualia Senolytic is a clinically tested formula with 9 vegan, non-GMO, gluten-free, plant-derived compounds that help your body naturally eliminate senescent cells, helping you feel years younger in just months. And the best part? You only take Qualia Senolytic just 2 days a month. It's an easy thing you can do to feel years younger, and it can literally transform how well you age. Go to qualialife.com/lovely to try Qualia Senolytic. It's backed by a 100-day money-back guarantee, and use promo code LOVELY, all caps, to get 15% off. As always, I'll leave the links in the show notes. That's Qualia Senolytic at qualialife.com/lovely with the code LOVELY to age amazingly well. This is the Not Your Mother's Menopause podcast. I'm Dr. Fiona Lovely, and I'm joined by a friend today, Mary Lee, menopause doula, and other amazing things. We have so many fun things to talk about today. Well, fun things, yes, and then serious things that I think are really not getting the airtime that they really very much need to. So, welcome to the show, Mary Lee.
Oh my goodness. Thank you, Dr. Lovely. I am so honored to be on this show because I look at you as someone I want to excel to, because I listen to your podcast. I lean in. I'm inspired by your work. I landed upon you when I was doing my menopause doula course, when I had to do a little research on what kind of information is out there in the ether about menopause to begin with. I'm a podcast junkie. I love to listen to podcasts. So I did a Google search on menopause podcasts, and lo and behold, yours came up, Not Your Mother's Menopause Podcast.
Yes.
You're a fellow Canadian woman.
I know, we're not so far apart, are we?
We are not. It was meant to be. So I just, to be here on your show now, it's like, oh wow, check in the box, bucket list. Yes. So
That's so
thank you.
cool.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for those kind words. I do the show in hopes that the information that gets dispensed here will be useful and helpful to whomever needs it. And so when I get to interact with my listeners, I'm just so excited. And it turns out, as you emailed me and said, hey, listen, this is kind of who I am. This is what I'm doing. I'm taking the course. And because you took my Brain Health Master course, if I recall correctly.
I did. And
thank you.
That was a turning point for me. We'll get into that. But yes.
Ah, amazing. Amazing. Here I am telling you I have no agenda for our conversation, but you might have one for it, which is so fun.
I always have an agenda.
Okay, that's right.
I was in PR for over 20 years. There's always an agenda.
Of course there is. Okay, Mary Lee, please tell us, how did you find yourself at your age, where you are in your life right now, talking about being a licensed menopause champion and a menopause doula, among many other things? Tell us, how did you get here?
Oh my God, it's such a crazy ride. So I've always done fitness, health, and wellness as a side hustle my whole career. And my military career started right out of high school into military college at age 18. But sports, I was fanatic about sports and competition. And so that side of me was always pulling me in. And I took my personal training certifications, taught step, Tae-Bo back in the 90s. And
oh, Tae-Bo, I loved!
Billy Blanks, boom, boom, boom.
I could do those roundhouse kicks like nobody else, man.
Yes.
Yes.
So good, right?
Yes.
And it really appealed to my masculine energy side, if you will. But as I started going deeper and deeper on my own journey through fitness and introduced yoga, and then took some yoga training in that area, and then I started teaching at a studio. And the one lady that owned the studio at the time said to me, because I was toying with the idea with the signature program to incorporate all the elements of yoga, but plus the chakras, because I'm really big on that. I take several courses on that as well. But the clients at the studio kept asking questions about perimenopause and menopause and brain fog and hot flashes. So I said to Shelley, if we're going to do a signature program with that target market in mind, we should get smart on menopause. And so it just happened to come across an article in Vanity Fair about menopause doula and how the awareness and the conversation around menopause is being elevated by celebrity figureheads. And some of them are employing the help of a menopause doula. And I thought, a doula? There's a doula for that? Yes, there is. So I Googled it, and lo and behold, the Doula Training Center in Toronto was offering a menopause doula course. It was designed by their previous founder and director, Chauncey King. And it was her course. And the reason why she created, I had to bring her on my podcast because I needed to know her backstory. She created it because all of her clients through birthing and postpartum were now entering the perimenopause phase. And they were asking her, Chauncey, I don't know what's going on with me. Help. She said, yeah, there really is. This is another significant journey in a woman's life of hormonal changes. It needs to be addressed. And again, she recognized, like you and I, there's a total lack of information in this area. And so she created this course. I jumped on it. I took it. And the very first module was the science of the hormones. Well, my little research brain just went crazy because I know you love research and you say that
Yes.
often. And thank you for that. Thank you for bringing the science to the community, to your listeners, rather than the sensationalism. Because let me tell you, having a career in public relations for so long, sensationalism gets the attention and the data and the science is rarely looked at. And we need to lean in on the science because the social media landscape now around menopause, I think is in part is lending to some of the problems of the misinformation and disinformation around menopause.
Interesting.
So yeah, and a lot of my clients in PR, when I was doing a public relations practitioner, both with the military and post-military when I retired, were in science and healthcare, life sciences, bioinnovation. I had BioCanX based in Ottawa of Cancer Research as one of our clients. Glycomics, the understanding of the study of sugar molecules and how they can help in healing the body, diabetes, Alzheimer's. And so really my job was to unpack very complex information and break it down to bite-sized digestible chunks so that your audience would get the call to action, whether it was buy-in, support the taxpayers' dollars, subscribe, whatever it was. We had to take this dense information and turn it on its head so that people felt meaningful, impactful, human connection, and it was relatable. And what could be more than relatable than going through menopause? And I was entering that arena, and I had clients that were asking for information, and they were looking to people who were leading them in practices and classes to know that information, but I didn't know it. So I had to go get educated. And the more I got into it, one course led to another, led to your brain health masterclass, which was totally eye-opening because then I really started connecting the dots. And one thing I loved about being in communication was you're a connector. You take information and you start connecting it with an audience that needs that information. And I find maybe that's one of my superpowers, if you will, is as a doula now, I'm connecting women with some really great information because the power to heal or to manage their menopause is right here in them. They have it. They just need to tap into it. They need like a coach or a cheerleader in the corner who's saying, you can do this, but here is some real evidence-based research and information. Like some of it's still hot off the press. Like you and I were sharing some of that information just the last couple of emails before today's podcast. And this is something that they can arm themselves with and take it to their doctor, their healthcare team, and advocate for their health. Their quality of life is number one. And one of the things I really loved about being in the military is that you're very forthright and speaking your truth and demanding, giving orders, taking orders. It was part of who I am. So it just seemed to fit in nicely. So how does a military girl go to become a menopause doula? It was a wild ride. And honestly, I just had to go in the flow. I just had to let it happen and to say, okay, universe, guide me.
take over.
I am a vessel, and let me do your work. And here I am. Here I am.
Well, I follow your coaching work and I'm on your email list and I got the notification, actually it looks like it was April 16th of 2024, that you had written a blog post called Menopause and PTSD Among Women in
Mm,
Service.
mm, mm.
And when I saw that blog post come out, I sent you an email right away. I said, please come on the show. You need to
Yeah,
talk to the community, my community, about this very thing, because I was unaware. And
yeah,
I've got my head in this stuff all the time, as you know. And I think if I'm unaware, first of all, the military is not great at handling what happens after you send human beings into a war zone or prepare human beings for a war zone. And I don't, I should have looked these numbers up off the top of my head, but of course, the listeners of this show are primarily in the United States, and the VA in the US has done legendarily terrible job at taking care of mental health of their veterans. And so when this came up, I went, well, if the men aren't getting the attention, then the ladies certainly aren't getting the
yeah,
attention. And
yeah,
so this is ultimately a conversation that I would like to have with you. I know
absolutely.
menopause, I know brain, but I know nothing, next to nothing about the military and what it's like to be a veteran. So
Yeah,
let's mash together what we know and come up with
yeah,
some nuggets that can be really helpful. So,
yeah.
what do you think when I bring up the subject? The article's great, by the way. You can Google it. We can attach that blog page to the show notes as well for the listeners.
Perfect.
But talk about what about this, what your experience has been.
Definitely, like, experience is our best teacher. And leaning into my experience, I didn't quite understand if I had PTSD at first. I knew that things just didn't feel right in terms of how I could manage my anger, um, my depression. And it wasn't serious depression, it was just in and out, high anxiety and depression and anger. And honestly, I have to thank my husband who went through the journey of having his PTSD diagnosed. He's now a retired Canadian Forces Search and Rescue technician. So for our American counterparts, you'd probably relate that to either a Navy SEAL or the parajumpers. You go into crash sites. If you ever watched that movie, The Guardian, with Kevin Costner, and they jump in to save the ship, the wreckage. I mean, that's the line of work he did. And as a matter of fact, the uh, the perfect storm, so that actual storm that had happened, our Canadian Forces Search and Rescue technicians were also involved in that, as well as the American Coast Guard and the PJs. So it's akin to that kind of a role, and they're dealing with trauma all the time. So to quickly bring it back to me, when he went through his journey, he started to see the patterns and understand it. And he was quite frank with me. And he said, Mary, I think maybe you just might have it too. And here's what I've learned, and this is what I see in you. And that was a hard pill to swallow. But I I realized that perhaps he might have been onto something. So I looked into it, and fortunately, I had we have a great assistance called Veterans Farmers, and that system actually helped me to submit a request to have an assessment. And sure enough, it was a grueling assessment, and you have to live a lot of traumas. And sometimes
Oof.
you don't know which trigger was the event. For me, not going into too much details, but it was clearly an abuse of power over me, verbal abuse, mental torture abuse, just preying on me as a young woman in the military, as early as military college. And it continued on, and the pattern continued on because when you're young, you don't know the coping skills in your young 20s. And your prefrontal cortex is still developing too, which is interesting about the brain and how trauma can impact that development in its structure. So again, all that to say is that I lost my identity of who I was. because it was being stripped away, not only because I was in uniform and you must conform, but it's because I was being cast as this vulnerable victim that needed to be preyed on. And I allowed that pattern to continue throughout my career to my detriment because I lost my power. I didn't know how to stand in my power. I would literally cower in certain situations where it was very dominant, masculine energy supervisor, and it just started repeating its pattern and its pattern. Um, it was very, very challenging. It was very difficult for me in many situations. Not to say that all my supervisors were terrible, but that ones that were it was pretty ugly. It was pretty ugly. Um, you know, some sexual issues involved with it as well. Again, it's hard to discuss, but overall, I recognize that I do have PTSD, but more so, I've been now led on a journey that I can find the help I need. And that journey led me to this interesting cross section between menopause and PTSD. It's very complex, it's very nuanced. I mean, menopause in itself is a stressor on the body, and the cascading effects from inflammation to high cortisol levels to even impacting the neuroendocrine system. That whole way that estrogen chemicals talk in the body, and when they're dysregulated, what happens to the body. But then you add on to it the stressors of PTSD, and that significant trauma that is left undealt with without the coping skills manifests into this post-traumatic situation where you keep replaying, re-experiencing over and over again the stimulation. I mean, sometimes it's long after the trauma is forgotten, but the body remembers.
Mm.
The cells, the messages that the pathway that the body designed after dealt with the trauma, it exists. And you keep walking that pathway over and over again because it's become so familiar. Again, long after what happened, the stress has gone. Like, what exactly did happen? All I know is that I'm in the state of stress. And when there are certain stimuli and triggers, I relive it all over again. Even in
Wow.
some of my civilian positions, if I had that same dominant um, supervisor or manager or even a coworker, and they did something, said something, and put me in that state of fight flight, I was reliving the trauma all over
Wow.
again. And I had to
Years
get off
later. Yes?
years later.
Wow.
So, and as it turns out, and I find this interesting, this is what led me down this pathway of research, is that a lot of it goes back to a childhood adverse experience, an ACE, like an adverse childhood
Adverse childhood
experience, yeah,
experience.
ACE.
Yes. Yeah.
And because when you're young, you're not if you don't have that nurturing environment, and it doesn't have to mean that it's a completely violent upbringing, but if you just don't have the nurturing environment that says you're okay, you're safe, you're loved, you're respected, you're, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs or the root chakra, our base, I belong, I'm safe, I'm secure. If that is not stable, and this goes back to the brain too, if the foundation, the building blocks of the brain is not stable, then you put any weight on top of that, it's going to crack. It's not going to be able to support that unsurmountable weight of trauma because
Mm-hmm.
you're never given the coping skills. So
Mm-hmm.
then when you're triggered with something that brings you back into that moment, you don't know how to deal with it. You just replay it over and over again. And through my cognitive behavior therapy, I've been able to unpack this and recognize that my behavior patterns probably started from what happened in childhood.
Mm-hmm.
Some I remember, some I don't. A lot of it having to do with being um, not feeling a sense of I'm being heard, I'm being respected, I'm being
Yeah.
loved.
Yes. And that's that, you talked about the Maslow's hierarchy and sort of the next level up from just the basic care and of a child is affirmation. And are you being seen? Are you
Yeah,
being heard? And we
yeah.
know that there's a link to these things and what's called complex PTSD. And I have looked at a lot of these things in the last few years for myself and my patients. And I dare say, Mary, that when it comes to the CPSD or complex PTSD,
Hmm.
um, for those of us that are Gen X, this is how our parents raised us,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
Because it's how they were taught by their parents who were the wartime generation.
So true.
And so I think what you have described, the details will change a little bit, but I think it will describe a lot of women's experience, especially for those of us now in this perimenopausal shitstorm, if I could put it that way, 'cause it
For
really
sure.
is. I never know what's coming next, but I
I
got to be
know.
careful of saying that. But thank you for sharing your story, because your vulnerability will allow somebody else, and hopefully many other women, to see themselves in what you've just talked about and be able to say, oh, okay, this isn't me. I'm not broken. I just had a bad experience. And ultimately, those experiences become what we call in neurorehabilitation, we call it negative neuroplasticity.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
get into that loop, you're triggered, something's happened, you're triggered, you're in the space, and then you're just firing that pathway again and again and again. And without realizing it, ultimately, allowing that, not allowing isn't the right word, but that experience continues to live on because someone hasn't we haven't been taught how to break that pattern of thinking, right?
It's exactly it.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
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 And we've seen horrifying things, but anyways, um something else really struck me as you were sharing your story, that abuse of power is how you described it.
Mhm.
And you also described it as, I was never taught to stand in my power. I mean, let's talk about these big things
Oh,
that are
yeah.
coming up for us now as women in this era where we literally have the choice to either suffer or take care of ourselves.
It, exactly. We're given two choices. You've got two roads to go down. Which one is it going to be? Suffer in
Yeah.
silence, or yeah, or not be able to advocate and just take whatever anybody else thinks is best for you. And you suppress your power right through
Oof.
the most important time in our lives is when we're stepping in to our
Yes.
power. Ayurveda says that menopause is the age of wisdom. We
I
have to
love that.
step into that wisdom, but we can only get wisdom from experience.
Mm.
And now when I work with women, I say, lean into that experience, embrace it. It's part of your story. It's part of your brain story too. And when I say, when you can look at yourself, observe yourself like you're your own alchemist, you're a chemist in a chemistry lab. Let's make some significant observations. When you can step out and observe instead of absorb it, first of all, I find you stop that brain pattern right away. Almost, it's like you're taking control, and your brain goes, "Oh, okay, let's observe this now." So for me, I find that that's the first piece of empowerment, and then the second piece of empowerment is saying, "This is my story. These are my pain points, but there's somebody else's pain points too." So that's another one of my favorite sayings is your mess is your message, and I
That's
think
a
that
good
you might
one.
have, yeah, your mess,
It's a
it
good one.
totally is. And
Yep.
until you start to recognize your own mess and actually appreciate it and go, oh, okay.
Yep.
And that's, I think, why in my journey since I started doing the doula training, and then that led to another course, to another course. Oh my God, you could take courses forever, right? But
Yes.
I finally landed, and I'm still kind of landing, that I need to work with PTSD women. And they don't have to be uniformed. And when I say by uniform, military and also our first responders, um, just anybody who's PTSD. And I think the statistics from the World Health Organization is that 65 to 70% of individuals worldwide will go through a trauma. And that's pretty significant. But the numbers who that trauma becomes a PTSD are still fairly small, like around 6 to 7%, I believe. In Canada, it's slightly higher. I think it's about 9%. I don't know why it might be higher. Maybe it's because we have the trauma of our cold winters. Oh, I don't know. I don't
You
know
think
what it
that
is.
makes us more resilient?
That's right. Why are we
But
suffering more here in Canada? I don't
but
know. Our
what
dollar is really bad. I don't know.
Right? Here's what comes to mind when you say that. I think when you said 65 to 70% of us go through a trauma, but then there's a small percentage that it becomes PTSD. I think the reality is we do not recognize what PTSD looks like. And so when someone asks
Bingo.
us, right, could you have PTSD? What we tend to think of is the like from the most basic terminology, the army guys in the US that were exposed to blasts. That's what we think of. Or the ones that have been on active duty in a war zone. That's what we think of. We don't think about the women at all.
Yeah.
And men's brains are very, very different. And here's what's interesting as I was going through some of the research that you sent me yesterday. PTSD is hallmarked by flashbacks, nightmares, and a hyperarousal state. Hypervigilance, suspicious and distrustful, especially with relationships. Menopause
Bingo.
much? Like that's menopause.
I
So
know.
how do
That's,
we, as women, do we hear this? Sorry, go ahead, ask your please, I'll let
I
you
know.
comment before I ask the next
Well, this
question.
is what prompted me to say, oh crap, I got to do a blog on this. Oh, I now have to do a podcast, a solo episode on this. And what I realized was that it's so complex and nuanced. And you're right. The full understanding what's happening with PTSD, it seems like if it's you're uniformed, it's understood, oh, war, shell shock. We're having a better understanding because we have an institution that's really embracing it, studying it at VA in the United States. Here in Canada, it's a bit of everybody, the Veterans Affairs as well as the military itself, Health Canada. But all that to say is that when you're in an organization to which you expect PTSD to happen, it's better understood. But in a broader context, there's PTSD happening all the time with people who COVID PTSD, the isolation from loved ones, being told you can't go see loved ones, or being isolated in your home. My stepdaughter, my beautiful stepdaughter, Kelsey, is a first responder, a paramedic in Calgary. Oh my God, the things that she has witnessed when she was in downtown Calgary that was one of her last beats. It's like everybody's being exposed. And if they don't, I think it comes back to if you don't have the coping mechanisms to deal with it, it stays with you. It stays in the neurotransmitters, that pathway in the body. It's in the emotional cell of the body, our chakras, our emotional centers, their energy centers. It's stuck in so many ways, and we just don't know how to let it go. I'm going to talk to what I've discovered. But going back to the fact that it is very nuanced. And then menopause in itself, I mean, it's only been in the last decade and we're still moving the yardstick. It took till what, 2017 for the World Health Organization to actually come out with a statement that they fucked up that $1 billion study that was commissioned by the National Institute of Health. I'm sorry. I
Mary,
had to do
tell
it.
me how you really feel about that.
All right. Talk about
great.
standing in my power.
that was so good. I felt it. Rawr.
Yeah. I mean,
Felt
like,
it. Yeah.
I always say, in PR, we always say, tell your story, the 5 W's when you're writing a press release, the who, what, when, where, why, and then how or how much if it's relevant. Well, the 5 W's of the WHI: wrong test, wrong population, wrong age group, wrong, what was it? I wrote them all down. And this is the menopause brain, in fact. And there's 5. And as I started listing them off, and this is not my work, I actually have to credit this to Dr. Sarah Gottfried, who's another leading woman. Here we go. Yeah, she's another leading woman in the field of hormonal health. Just love her. Wrong study, wrong population, wrong hormone therapy, because they're using synthetics, not bioidenticals.
Yep.
Wrong age. Yeah, average age was 65.
Way too late.
Well past 10 years of the menopause age.
Yeah.
And it lasted for the wrong duration. And I'm like, oh, 5 W's, 5 W's of the WHI. So, I've digressed, but really, all that to say is that it took to 2017 for subsequent research to actually debunk the myths, but the ghosts of those headlines last.
Absolutely, they do. They still do. Just yesterday, in the office, I had a woman say she was having all these symptoms, and I said to her, "Have you considered HRT? Let's get you connected with that." And she said, "I can't take it. My mom had breast cancer." I'm like, "Okay, hold on a second. So you're
Yeah.
going to deny yourself feeling well for the next 50 years on the off chance that you might get breast cancer, whether it's connected to HRT or not. And oh, by the way, when we do HRT properly, there is no accelerated incidence of breast cancer." So I know it every single day in the clinic. I am answering that question in some way. So I had um, a senior come to see me, and she had experienced bleeding. And she, her doctor was like, "Well, I don't know what it is. You don't have a uterus anymore. It's not that. So we're not worried about that."
Oh,
And so I said to her, I said, "Well, did they identify where the bleeding came from?" And she said, "No." And I said, "Ask your doctor for some vaginal estrogen cream, because obviously
yeah.
things are sensitive and friable down there. And this is just going to like give it a
Right.
drink of water." So on the follow-up
Yeah.
appointment, I said, "Did you take your doctor the prescription pad that I wrote?" And she said, "No, no, no, I didn't talk." I'm like, "Oh my God, it's your vagina. It's fine. Boys talk about their penis all the time. It's fine."
Exactly.
It's fine. Anyways,
Yeah.
we super digress, but I want to come back to something you said a few minutes ago when you were talking about the paramedics.
Okay.
First of all, I have no doubt that as a global phenomenon, for the rest of our lives, we will be dealing with the fallout of the stress and the trauma of the pandemic. So I'll just put a dot in that and put it off to the side. Um,
Hmm.
Medicine changed, humans changed,
Hmm.
and we thought we were stressed before that, but it went to a different level. So I'll just put that to the side. So I can only imagine. Now, I have a patient who I've taken care of for many, many years, a young woman
Hmm.
who decided she was going to go to become a paramedic. And in one of her training runs, she experienced the death of an infant, which is incredibly traumatic for anybody, but especially a young female who's not had children of her own. And so when she and I were talking about it, I asked her, I said, "So what have your advisors given you? Like, have they offered you some counseling? Have they?" And oh, but the answer to that was no. She got time off for stress leave, but
Yeah.
the answer was no to counseling. And I said, "Okay, so then how do you manage um, the mental health of your patients? What were you taught?" And she said, "We're taught very little." And as you know, because you've got a family member that's a paramedic, quite often when there is a medical crisis, that's the first line of people that show up to help. Now, whether that's someone witnessing an event that is
Yeah.
calling in, or that's someone that is actually in crisis that's calling in for help. Like, and the first responders are not even being taught how to help somebody in a mental health crisis. And they themselves are not supported in their own mental health in that job. Now, this has all been in the last 4 years. So I would like to think that things have changed dramatically since when you took your initial training in the
Yes.
military, and it doesn't sound like it.
No, no. We we play lip service a lot to like things like the Me Too movement and cleaning up the harassment in the military and sexual abuse for women. And I'm going to be honest and frank without naming
Please.
names. And the highest general in the Canadian Armed Forces is on television speaking to this. And I know that that individual means it full heartedly, but was themselves one of the perpetrators or a witness to the harassment of women in the college. It's a tough fucking pill to swallow.
Yes, it is.
So it's like, I can't sit and watch on TV, which was another impetus for me to go get help.
I
I would
bet.
physically get angry. You assholes. You
Yeah.
have been awarded by your high rank
Yeah. Yeah.
because you did all the check in the box.
Right.
But the most important thing was to be human, and you couldn't do that. But you got away with it because we weren't talking about it. We just soldiered on.
Oof.
And this has got to end, because what is happening now is when we hit those menopause years, when the estrogen leaves the body, which is a beautiful trauma modulator, and it's gone, that veil lifts, and holy shit balls. What you're
Yes.
left with is a mess.
Yes.
We're also speaking our truth, because when that
Yes.
male veil lifts,
Yeah.
there's no filter.
Nope.
As your listeners probably already heard already.
Yes.
Full man.
But it's so important to speak what you just did. Thank you for sharing that.
My heart is just like pounding in my chest right now.
I can feel it. I can feel it for you. I can feel it. And I want to be mindful about how I'm going to say what I'm going to say. We have a known criminal who has just been elected to the highest level of government. And it's now I'm going to lighten it a little bit, because as a rule, I try not to talk about politics on this show, although we are talking about women's health. How can we not talk about politics? Because they involve
Entrenched.
themselves in our uterus.
The patriarchy has
Oh yeah,
literally, like, what are we? Is this
it's
like
true. It's true.
Handmaid's Tale? Like, what kind of dystopia are we living in?
I
Oh,
know. I
this is
know.
where
It's so
life
strange.
imitates art, art imitates life.
I
Bingo.
don't, yeah, exactly. Years and years ago, Chris Rock did this comedy bit where he was talking about, I think it was the mayor of Detroit was caught smoking crack or smoking weed, or maybe it was Minneapolis. And his whole bit, now this was like the late 90s, okay, early 2000s. And his whole bit was, how you going to tell little kids to not get high when the mayor's on crack?
Oh, God, yeah.
Like, look, here we are,
Jeez.
like 25 years later, just letting it happen. Anyways, okay, I'm going to put that all down because you and I are both Canadians. And while this affects us, we did not have a vote here. And so we'll just move on.
But it was a pretty bleak day, November 5th, I'll say.
Yes, I'll
My
say.
daughter said she cried and cried, and in the bathtub she cried. She says, just womankind worldwide, we've just taken another step back in time.
That's right. We can't, I was hopeful that the persecution of women was taking a step forward, and in fact it did not. So, all right. Now, to bring this back. So what do? We see
Okay.
all of this on the go, Mary. We see all of it, and it's so hard because um I got on a Zoom call with a friend on the other side of the world, and she and I cried together. So I think there was
Oh,
probably a lot of us that went through
God.
that day. A lot of us, because this does affect us globally, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So when we see this, we feel it for ourselves and we're not sure. Maybe we've had a diagnosis, maybe we haven't, maybe we suspect, maybe we're not sure if the mental health stuff we're feeling is menopause, or is it
Yeah.
PTSD? Chances are, by the way, it's probably both. If you're a woman
Both.
experiencing PTSD between the ages of 35 and 55, chances are you're perimenopausal at the same time, right?
Yes.
So the answer to that query is, you don't need antidepressants. You need a proper diagnosis, someone to prescribe you hormones, and someone to go through therapy with you, a therapist. So let's
Yeah.
talk about that, please.
Okay. So I'm going to speak both from my experience and my journey, and then what I've been starting to unpack in my menopause doula. And I've started designing my coaching program and my course around this too. First of all, recognizing that there's a conversation. So your healthcare provider should be on board. It's shared decision making to find symptom management. But you have to disclose the full picture. So as much as we demand our healthcare providers to listen to us and to have our quality of life in mind, we have to tell them the whole story. This is so hard because my doctor, and I love her. I'm so fortunate because she's on board. In fact, she even says to me, Mara, I'm not going to even question you when it comes to estrogen, like, because you can educate me on it. And thank goodness she was very forthright and honest about that. But when I said to her, can you fill out this paperwork for Veterans Affairs so that I can get some assistance with PTSD and you can share my file with them and they'll share information with you. She looked at me, she goes, how long have I known you? I did not know you had PTSD. I did not know you had these struggles. And I said, I didn't know it was relevant because I didn't know myself. And then I didn't know how to tell you until push came to shove and I had to for the paperwork. And then I realized, and the Menopause Society, when they put out those press releases regards to the Persian Gulf War study they did on PTSD with women and the trauma with sexual function and sexual health, really the summary of it is the call to action, if you will, is you have to have a very complex diagnosis with your doctor, and your doctor needs to know the big story. So if you want to achieve shared decision making in any relationship, you have to fully disclose. And I think I think a lot of emotional intelligence comes into play with this too. That self-awareness relationship as well, managing the relationship piece. You got to be open and honest. But for women, it's very hard. Talking about menopause is hard enough. You add on a trauma and it's difficult. So, and this isn't a selfish plug for a doula or a coach, but honestly, telehealth and the time with your doctor is very short and very limited. So you have to maximize that time to your advantage so you can get the most out of that time with them. But with a coach, with a doula, I give you 90 minutes, like 9 times more time, and as many times as you want to come back. So in that time, we start getting to work on unpacking things. And the first job number one for a doula is to show up as a compassionate listener. So somebody can feel seen and heard without any judgment, just allowing them to talk, because talk therapy in itself, and we're not counselors or therapists, but talking something through, as we know in experiences, the more you talk about it, the more you get these aha moments like, oh, wow, until I actually just said that, I didn't see the connection. And I learned a lot from cognitive behavior therapy that I've gone through without stepping into the role of that, because I know my lane, I stay in my lane, but I've learned how to ask those curious questions to allow my client to start to elaborate. And then I help them connect the dots. And then we get back to work saying, what is the vision you have for yourself in your future? Like with all of this that's happening to you now and maybe in your past, where do you see yourself a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? Do you want to have the physical strength and the emotional capacity to be able to show up for your family, your kids, your grandkids? If you're still working, you still want to be able to continue on with your career. It's certainly if they're accelerating in their career, and that's a whole new topic on itself, as well as women in the workforce with menopause champion workplaces. But if they see themselves still accelerating and they're in the throes of menopause, do they want to be stuck, literally stopped dead in their tracks, or they have to give up on their career, give up on their dreams or hopes, and in some cases give up on themselves? Because you mentioned this in my podcast, is that it's no wonder the highest suicide or suicidal thoughts is with women in their late 40s, which align perfectly with menopause, because we really do feel like we're going crazy. So it's
And
parachuting.
we're just
Yeah.
misunderstood. That's all.
And we're just misunderstood. Yeah. We're just misunderstood or dismissed or ignored or not getting our words out or being gaslit. So then we get to work. I help them see it from a biological perspective. First of all, it's not your fault. This is the biology of the body. This is the role of estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. This is how they talk to each other in the body. It's just not sexual reproduction hormones. These are all the chemical messengers that are sending signals to all those cell receptors that tell the body, breathe, think,
Mhm.
everything, everything. So when it leaves the body, of course you're going to feel it in your sleep, in your skin,
Mhm.
in your vaginal atrophy, in your sexual health, in your fatigue level, everything. And here's why. And I try to keep it as simple without getting too sciencey, but I tend to do that because I'm a research geek. But I try to pack it in the
Me
most
too.
simplest. I just like, oh, that's so good. And then, yeah, I think I should have been an endocrinologist, but I'll save that for my next lifetime. I'm just laying the foundation.
Yep. 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 I get it.
But and then from there, we start to look at all of the options that are available. One, one thing that they have in their toolbox right away is lifestyle choices.
Mhm.
So while they're waiting to get in to see their doctor to maybe have a deeper discussion around bioidentical hormones, like, okay, but while you're waiting, what can you do right now?
Mhm.
And we try to look at it from very small, like smart goal setting. Step one, specific goal. Make it measurable, make it time bound, and make it applicable, if you will.
Mhm.
So, well, because I think it's this bite off this big chunk. Oh, I got to
Mhm.
quit coffee, alcohol, uh,
Oof.
grains, sugars.
No.
I got to go to the gym. I got to lift more weights. They see this as like big insurmountable things. Like, no, what's one thing you can do right now?
Just one. Just
Just
one. Get
one.
started. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Let's talk about stress for a minute. Stress isn't just hard on your mental health, it's also expensive for your biology. If you're dealing with chronic stress, you may want to take a good mineral supplement. Because it turns out when you're constantly stressed, your body burns through a lot more minerals than usual. Chronic daily stress depletes magnesium, potassium, selenium, zinc, and more. Even worse, those mineral deficiencies make future stress hit you harder. If you want to break the cycle of chronic stress, you have to replenish your mineral stores. Minerals make you more resilient to the negative effects of stress, helping you get back on your feet. That's why I love Beam Minerals. Beam makes things easy. You just take a capful of concentrated, mineral rich liquid each morning. It tastes like water and it gives you every essential mineral your body needs to deal with the stress in the right ratios with high bioavailability. I've been using Beam for a while now. You'll feel it working within days. You'll have way more energy and you'll be amazed by the difference it makes for your stress levels. Give Beam a try. Head to beamminerals.com. That's BEAMMINERALS.com and use the code LOVELY for 20% off your first order. Thanks, Beam. Well, and I think ultimately for our generation, we were raised with um, the diet industry having
Ah,
been explosive when we were in its size and growth when we were kids. And so we watched our mothers punish themselves by making all of these decisions that, yes, it may have been important, although we know now much better information about nutrition and what we need to actually, what we need to fuel the human body and brain. But
mhm.
it's so easy for us to slip into these punitive patterns of, oh,
Yes.
this is how you get health. No, boo, it's not. You love yourself forward. That's how you get health,
Yeah. Ah,
right?
I love that you said that. It really does start with the foundation is self-love and self-respect.
Mm-hmm. Compassion, self compassion. Oh
Because
my God.
yeah, if
Yeah.
you can't give it to anybody else if you don't have it for yourself. And that is daily work, that's lifelong work. That's
Yes.
why meditation and finding, whatever makes us feel spiritual, not spiritual woo-woo. Um, I like the word woo-woo though. It's like, woo,
It's so
I'm
fun,
excited.
right? I know. The woo
But
is good.
spirit, yeah, But and again, I'm going to steal the words from somebody else, and that was Dr. I think it's Andrew Newberg, who's on the Mel Robbins podcast. He was talking about neuroscience and spirituality and the brain, and just whatever spiritual, whatever finds you back to what makes you feel whole and
Mhm.
yourself.
Mhm.
Walk in nature,
Mhm.
petting your dog, pet therapy, whatever that might be, yoga. Find that, embrace that, spend more time doing that, and then the other thing I like to say is be okay with what comes up. And this is what you learn in cognitive therapy, to the point where, again, you're observing it, you're not absorbing it. Like, recognize this is part of your story. Lean into it and understand that. I mean, if you're of the mindset that we all came into this lifetime with a blueprint, and we have to fulfill those agreements, if you will, to be able to find our higher selves. If you're of that mindset, I seek comfort in that. It's like, say, okay, this is supposed to be part of my journey.
Mhm.
Your mess is your message. Lean into those
Mhm.
pain points, find your transformation, and share it with somebody else. All those great things that they tell you. But it really, it does, it's so basic. We overthink it sometimes.
Mhm.
And oftentimes it's just, and I love how you would do that in the brain course. We would always do that moment of reflection and meditation, so that we can, and I love your quote, health
Yeah.
happens at the speed of safety.
Ooh,
Like,
goosebumps. I
I
said
know, but
that.
that's yours. It's yours. Yes. And it's like,
Yes.
oh, so just, we can do so much healing. That's why they call it rest repair in the parasympathetic nervous drive. So we can do so much, but we can also find answers and inner wisdom when we just downregulate the nervous drive,
Mhm.
and then just allow whatever to come up,
Yeah.
and then say, okay, I can work
Abs-
with this.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is, again, we're talking about the skills that we're not taught. How do
Taught.
we stand in our power? How do we take
Yeah.
care of ourselves? And this is a big one, is
Yeah.
managing those what we call the ventral vagal state, which is
Yeah.
being able to be in that safety space so that we
Yeah.
can think clearly, we can sleep well, we can interact well, we can um, exist without having, angst that goes on for potentially um, decades ultimately. And I make it sound very simple, and obviously things like trauma do affect how we can dip into or not that particular state
Mm-hmm.
of vagal tone. And it's a great conversation, because we ultimately have so much power to heal ourselves. Again, another thing we have
Yes.
not been taught. And uh, we're talking about what it means to be a menopause doula, and thank you for sharing your coaching process. That's so important. I also teach menopause doulas, and what I
Yes.
teach them up front is, number one, ask the woman in front of you, how does she want to feel? Because
Yeah.
ultimately, as women, how often has someone who cares for us, professionally anyways, started with those words? How do you want to feel? When you ask a woman that question, the universe opens up.
So true. Yes. So
It
true.
it really is. And so for those of you listening that this is the first time you've heard me talk about the Menopause Doula Society, which is the certification, the school that I have, I'll drop a link in the show notes. You can take a look at that too. But listening to Mary's podcast will give you the insight of what a menopause doula ultimately does. Is we act as a coach and a cheerleader. That's what we
Absolutely.
do.
Yeah. That's what a doula does. A woman who
Yes.
serves. Great
Yeah.
term for doula, a woman who serves.
It's an
It's no wonder I
excellent
went
term.
from
Yes.
uniform serving my
Yeah.
country to now
To
serving
serving women.
women. That
Yeah.
was in my blueprint. I'm pretty sure that
It must have been. It must have
serve.
been. Okay, Mary, if people want to know more about you, where do they find out more about you?
Okay, so my website, and it's spelled phonically, so it's ML Coaching. So that would be E Coaching. There's a reason why I call it ML Coaching, apart from the fact that it's the phonic spelling of my initials, Mary Lee. M is a German term for universal, M or and L is Greek and Hebrew for feminine. Menopause, what could be more universally feminine, right? So
Yes.
that's why I chose it. It's a little play on words, but it made sense. So my website is mlcoaching.com, and I'm on Instagram as m_l_coaching. And my menopause and my podcast changed names. It used to be called All Things Menopausal. I changed it to the Menopause Disruptor podcast. All of us are the disruptors. All of us who are in menopause are having a shakeup of the way we think, act, and treat menopause. We're on the cusp of a big change, but we have to keep disrupting the status quo and demand the changes that we deserve. So the more noise that we can get behind this and raise our voices collectively, the more opportunities we can have to get the quality of life that we deserve with our healthcare team, with society, with the workplace. So I changed it to that, and it was really because I had gone to a trade show to promote my business, and talking to the women who would stop by and the things that they would say about what their doctors had said to them. Case in point, one woman had said, I know we digress, but a woman had said she wanted to explore the options of bioidentical hormone therapy. And her doctor said, yeah, well, you're still on birth control, aren't you? She says, yeah, but I'm 50 now. And he says, well, as long as your husband is still producing, you have to stay on birth control. And I'm not going to put you on HRT because it'll be a conflict. It's like, talk about the patriarchy.
Whoa.
Telling her, you have no choice. It's your husband's issues. So we need to make sure that his situation is taken care of first. It just broke my heart. It broke my heart. Another woman, beautiful woman, lovely personality. I could just feel her energy the moment she talked to me, stepped up to me. And she said, I wanted to explore HRT with my doctor. And he said, oh, girl, you need to lose a whole ton of weight before we even approach that subject. Oh my God. It just, again, they're being blamed and shamed because of what's happening to their body. And it's not their fault. It's simple biology. But then again, there's tools that you can do, little tweaks that all of a sudden you can address that inflammation, that rising cortisol, which is a whole new subject.
Yeah.
But again, digress.
These stories will break your heart for sure. And I know they're shocking. I just heard a new one the other day. It was a patient on the table for a PAP with her gynecologist under the sheet, waiting for the PAP to be done. The gynecologist comes in the room, and as she's preparing her slides and all that business to get in and do the PAP, the patient says, making small talk, I would like to talk to you about HRT. The gynecologist closes everything up, brings down the table with the stirrups, and says, you need to talk to somebody else. I'm not the person to talk to about that. And leaves, says, you need to find another doctor. The gynecologist. The gynecologist. That is the people that are tasked with women's health. By the way, the statistic is 20% of gynecologists feel
20%.
adequately trained. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is why I do not tolerate the same people, the gynecologists on Instagram saying, well, what's a chiropractor talking about menopause? What's this coaching thing? And oh, this isn't in the science. You guys didn't pick up the goddamn phone when women needed you, and now you're going to have some judgment?
And now you're speaking. Yeah. I'm okay.
We're
I'm glad you
today,
said
Mary.
that. Oh my God. I'm so glad that you said that, because I have to stop doing this. There is a Facebook group that I check in, and it's a community that was started. There's probably over 4,000 in this, and it was all about having a community for menopause, to talk it over, help women feel heard. But now people are asking questions, and they're getting layman answers on how to address their issues. Things like, well, I saw on social media that I should be taking up to 5 milligrams per day, or if not more, on testosterone. And I weighed in. I said, what is your source? And they said the name. I want to throw daggers, but and I said, okay, hang on. So I promptly went into the International Menopause Society statement on testosterone and the Journal of Gynecological or OBGYNs, the Canadian Journal. And I said, this is the standard on testosterone. And granted, it needs to be more testing on this. However, this is the low dose to start on that's being recommended. But honestly, you have to understand the underlying issues because now science marches on. Again, that's another one of your quotes. But we
One
do
death at a
know
time.
yeah,
Yep.
testosterone needs to be researched, but right now it's only being prescribed if you have hyposexual drive disorder, HSDD. It's not necessarily low libido, because that could be for a number of reasons, like you're exhausted, you're tired. That can be addressed through other modalities, such as lifestyle changes, improving your sleep. But to blanketly think, well, if this social media influencer says I should be having testosterone and even more, and then a pharmacist weighs in who, taken at face value, believe a pharmacist who's speaking about menopause is menopause knowledge. And I'm thinking, okay, you guys are doing a disservice to your own selves now. Instead of getting educated, you're just spreading more of the sensationalism. Like, okay, stop. Let's get back into the evidence-based research. And again, with menopause expert group that I belong with, our standard is to follow what the International Menopause Society is saying, because they, in Canada too, and worldwide, they are the leading nonprofit research-based organization that is sharing the information that is relevant and accurate to women. You know, all those PubMeds that we find, again, like they're peer reviewed, but who funded them? What's the benefit? Again, I fall on what is the Menopause Society statement on these issues. And then where necessary, go digging. But you can go down a rabbit hole. It's for some of these women to, because it's the low hanging fruit, right?
Yep.
Let's just grab something that is said on social media. I like her. She's,
Yes, she's likable, that kind of thing.
she's
Yep.
likable, but she's
Yep.
also selling her own supplements, which is against their code of ethics, by the way. If they're an OBGYN and they're pushing their own supplements and their own protocols, Menopause Society is starting to call these women out on this now, saying, okay, hang on.
Yep.
You're doing a disservice, because now it becomes a marketing and a money issue, and that is the patriarchy all over.
That's a problem. Okay, so let me bring some awareness to this conversation because I had to learn this too. I'm a member of the Menopause Society, by the way. And what I have learned is that their approach is extremely conservative. And if we stay in, here's the thing, the North American Menopause Society, which is now the Menopause Society, recommends that women in perimenopause be put on the birth control as a form of HRT. I bet you didn't know that. So we have to be careful how we're making those statements, because if you look, here's the problem, Mary. The research is decades behind. So if we wait for NAMS or the Menopause Society to rise up with the research, say, okay, here's the science, so now it's okay, we're still going to be perpetuating the problem of the WHI. So there is a balance. There's a balance.
Yeah,
A
good
woman
point.
taking 5 milligrams of testosterone, that's a lot. That's a lot. But if her doctor determines that that is a safe dose for her, then that's a conversation that happens between them. So I understand, we have to look at what the research is showing us, but we also have to make sure that we're not buying into these rigid structures that are saying, okay, well, we don't really know yet what to do with that whole HRT bioidentical topical estrogen thing because the research isn't ready. So we're just going to put women on the pill because we've been putting women on the pill for, well, since the 60s, and they were okay. Now, I am seeing that over and over again. Right here in Calgary, there's a NAM specialist, and that's what she's doing. She ends up with people like are in my office, and she sends them back at the age of 52 with a birth control pill instead of proper HRT. So that's not appropriate either. And this is why I say it has to have this balanced approach. We cannot just be so shackled to what the research is showing. It's so far behind. And because it takes so long for these research studies to be done and to be vetted and to be, assessed and peer reviewed and all of that. It just takes so long. We're going to be so long behind. And so for a lot of us, we're going, okay, can we stay within the safety zone? We know certain things here. Well, let's just, let's try it and see what happens. And so I think, I know there's some fairly famous menopause influencers who um, mm, will take down anybody who doesn't follow every letter of the science that we have. And that's
Yeah.
not right either. Women's bodies are magic and mystery walking.
Yeah.
We literally
That's
are. And science
uh,
doesn't explain most of it.
that's true. I mean,
So I'd love to hear your
just
thoughts.
the literature that we just shared this morning was like literally hot off the press, September 2024, and then on November 11th, Veterans Day, Remembrance Day here in Canada, we had a Veterans Association, or I probably have that wrong, but the U.S.
Mhm.
Military site had put up that article again that was in Menopause Society about the PTSD and the Gulf War study of the 2,000 women that were studied in the Persian Gulf for early menopause and the relationship to that. Um, and so, yeah, we're seeing that fresh hot off the press, like all this brain health, like menopause being a brain health phenomenon is literally like fresh off the press. And
Brand new.
Dr. Lisa Mosconi's book, The
Scony. Yeah.
Menopause Brain, is still
Oof.
fairly
So
new.
good.
So I appreciate that you gave that caution. And it's such a delicate balance. It's very, again, it's very nuanced. It's fresh.
Yep.
Everybody's interpretation of it is, I recognize also it's individualized. And
Yes.
that is what really upsets me, is that be the word that keeps coming to my mind all the time is discernment.
Mhm.
Discernment. Women have to be wise, recognizing that if somebody says you need this, it doesn't always apply to you.
Yes.
We're like snowflakes. How our symptoms show up are like snowflakes. Our
Yes.
DNA is unique. And then you put on it our life experiences and then even the environment that we're exposed to. It's so different from
Yes.
everybody.
It's
So
so
it's a
nuanced.
matter, it
Yeah.
is. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I don't ever want to lead a client or a friend or a colleague down one road. I just say, here's some literature before you go and lean into a blatant statement of an influencer or just something that you
Yes.
saw. Do a background check and look into it, and then ask yourself,
Look
is
up the
could
research and do the gut check.
yeah,
Because even if it's the best
yeah.
research out there, but the gut says no, for God's sakes, listen to your gut 100% of the time. 100% of the time, right?
Yes, that's right.
Right?
And that is all about stepping into wisdom, leaning into that
Yes.
intuition
The
that we've
third eye,
shut off.
yes. Oh,
Yes.
yes, because it wasn't safe for us to have it, but that's another conversation. But, this is what makes it, first of all, the individual needs of a woman is just that. And this is what makes it so hard for medicine to
Yeah.
really step in and support us in the way that we need to, because medicine works off protocols and it works off
Yeah.
very regimented ways, which is, men's bodies can be that way. They are very linear. Whereas a woman's body is it's swirling colors in the air in all directions. Like if we're going to go for an art reference here, but I think this is what makes it, like
True.
when you talked about these papers coming out on Veterans Day or Remembrance Day, this is what makes it such an exciting time to be a menopause practitioner.
It
Both of
is.
us here, because every single week there's new and exciting research that drops that changes and shifts and informs how we look at a woman's body and brain at midlife and beyond. And how great is that? We are living in it. And I
Yeah.
had a patient come in the other day, earlier this week, 38 years old, saying, what do I do? Like, what do I do about this menopause thing? Like, I don't think I have any symptoms, but like I'm hearing my older sisters talking about it. And what I said was, babe, we got you. Because us Gen X
Yeah.
gals we are scrappy AF and we are not going quietly on this. So by the time you're symptomatic, we will have this figured out
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
much better than it is now. Although think about it now, Mary, versus like 5 years ago, you know?
Even 5 years. Yeah, exactly.
Amazing. It's so
Yeah,
different. 2 years, 1 year, like you said, the brain stuff is all brand new and unfolding. It's just my favorite thing to talk about and read about too. But
mine too.
okay, you and I could go on forever, clearly. So we must do this again. Please return to the show in the near future
Would
and
love
share
that.
some. Yes, thank you. And again, thank you for being a fan of the show. Now, I have two questions that I end my every show with my guests, and so I'm going to ask you
Okay.
those questions now. So, because we happen to live here in Canada and women's health is, generally speaking, better supported here in Canada, and we have maternal leave and actually parental leave, I think it's called now, so boys can take it as well, where our
Mhm.
employer covers the cost of our wages for a period of time. I envision a world where we get to have a menopause leave.
Oh, this is some of the stuff.
Supported, yeah, supported by our people. So whether that's our employer or our government. Okay, so what I'm doing here, Mary, is I'm having this conversation so we create the pattern in the field. Let's make the space in the quantum so that we can step into it. Okay.
Yes.
So a woman gets, let's say she gets a bursary. Okay, let's say she gets a lump sum of cash, and during that time, she gets to take a year away from work. She gets her bills paid by her employer or the government, and she gets a lump sum of cash to take care of herself in whichever way she would deem appropriate for her. Now, that could be travel, it could be training, it could be an HRT practitioner, it could be functional medicine, it could be yoga, it could be a menopause doula, it could be a retreat. What does that look like for you?
Well, actually, I kind of have that happening with me already, if to explain it in an odd
Please
way.
tell.
Well, it goes back to the PTSD. So, there was no lump sum of money to go off, like have babies and or go off and do menopause,
Do
which is
menopause. I love it.
unfortunate
Yeah.
because menopause needs to be supported in the workplace. And I think that if we support them in the workplace by either having accommodation to work remotely or hybrid, or even having breakout rooms, they may not have to necessarily up and leave. But in terms of what's happening, I am on what's called an income replacement benefit. I had to leave the workforce to deal with my PTSD because going through menopause, at the time of the great reveal for me, I realized that there was some trauma. So I actually left the workforce, and I do get a salary, but that salary is meant to replace what I would have been if I was back in the workforce. Now, for me personally, I'm using it in such a way that I'm being wise about it. I'm recognizing that apart from, bills to pay, etc., this is an opportunity for me to really invest in me and get that education that I want to share it with other women. So I'm being smart about it. I'm recognizing that this is a gift. Money is energy. I see it. And you invest into it, it comes back to you tenfold. I'm a full believer in that because I feel that if this is an opportunity, a gift to be given, it has to be shared. It really has to be shared
Mhm.
because we women do womanhood best when we do it as a team. Honestly,
Yes.
we were designed like our
Yes.
ancestors. So many different tribal, ethnic groups come together in circle and groups, and women do women best when they do it together
So
because we
how are
can
you
lean in.
spending those resources? How are you doing it? What's your menopause leave look like?
Well, it is, of course, trying to establish my business first and foremost. So I tell myself, I give myself a bit of an allowance and I say, I'm going to invest so much X percent. I come back from the wealthy barber, pay yourself
Yeah.
10% first, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I do that. I give 10% to me, whatever that I might accumulate over several months. So maybe I can take another course, go and get a whole bunch of brochures printed off, go to a trade show. I'm investing in my business because to me, I look at it as if I didn't believe in me and what my story, my PTSD story, if I didn't believe in it and I didn't share it, that is a disservice to womankind as far as I'm concerned. I took this journey for a reason. Now I have to pay it back. So I look at that investment as an opportunity to give back. It's energy. And like attracts like, law of attraction. It's an undeniable law. It's been proven in science. When I can give my energy by believing in myself, and if that means to buy another course or to put myself out there and say, I'm offering a workshop to you guys, and really stepping into that power. It's just energy, but it's a reflection that I believe in myself. And other people are going to look at it. And I have an example, and they're going to see that energy. And my example is this. Last night I was at my I mentioned this earlier, veterans farmers. So these are these offices across Canada that help veterans, um, just either with their claims or their PTSD, whatever it is they need. The staff is there to support them. There's lots of cannabis involved with it too, which is great. But anyways, that's again
You are
another
in
topic.
BC after all. No
Exactly. But that aside, we have an event where the ladies come together once a month, and we do an activity. And actually, October's activity was to go see Menopause musical. And oh my God, so good. So good. Anyway, so the event last night was to come together and make Christmas wreaths. But they said to me, because I knew the work I was doing in this field, and they said, would you speak about what you do as a menopause doula? Because they're actually, the backstory is they want me to come and do a workshop for veterans only. So I stood up last night and I said, hi, I'm broken. I got PTSD. I had a concussion, but I'm a menopause doula. And let me tell you, the intersection between menopause and PTSD is very complex and nuanced, and I'm starting to unpack that. And I want to help you through my journey and offer a workshop just for you guys, not just average women, but just for you, so I can bring in more of this complex PTSD and all the issues that we face. And like light bulb moments. At the end of our workshop, women were coming up to me and literally like, I'm in. I'm so in, Mary. And I realized I found my people. I found my community. But I couldn't have connected the dots if I didn't have that lived experience. And so that is my investment. So if a woman is given a chunk of money to go forth and conquer, do it from a place of self-love and compassion, but also to understand that we're here to help each other. And then lean into it. If something pops up on your feed and you just really feel, yeah, I want to take that spiritual course and learn how to talk to my angels, do it.
Absolutely. Because that's your instinct and intuition speaking. Yeah. 100%. 100%. So the last question I have for you is a quick one, and it goes like this. Knowing what you know now, what would you tell your younger self?
Oh my God.
Yeah, I feel that. Oh, I feel that. I feel that. Look at your beautiful self.
I'd give her a big hug.
Yeah.
I'd give her a big hug. And I'd wipe the tears from her eyes. I'll say, you've got this. Everything that's going to happen to you is for a reason. And I'm waiting for you on the other side. You got this. Don't be afraid.
Beautiful. Mary Lee, thank you so much for your time today. I've so appreciated it.
Thank you.
The information and other content provided in this show, or in any linked materials, is not intended and should not be construed as medical advice, nor is the information a substitute for professional medical expertise or treatment. We are doctors, but we aren't your doctor. Seek your doctor's opinion. If you or any other person has a medical concern, you should consult with your healthcare provider or seek other professional medical treatment. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something that you have heard in this podcast or in any linked materials. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor or emergency services immediately. The opinions and views expressed on this page and in this show have no relation to those of any academic, hospital, health practice, or other institution. Thank you.